The sky was burning. Planes cut across the clouds like falling comets, their wings aflame. Private Jack Miller gripped the steel frame of the C-47's hatch, heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his teeth. The jump light flicked from red to green, and the loadmaster shouted, "Go! Go! Go!" Then the world exploded. A flash, white, blinding, then the tail of the aircraft vanished in fire. The cabin filled with smoke and screams. Jack didn't think, he jumped. Wind tore at his face, his body tumbling in the freezing dark. For a moment he couldn't tell if he was alive or already dead. Then, crack! The parachute opened, jerking him upright. He hung there, swaying beneath a burning sky. The moon was drowned in smoke, tracer fire cutting red scars through the clouds. Below him stretched an ocean of shadow. Somewhere far away, flak bursts flickered like dying stars. He turned, searching for the rest of his unit. Dozens of chutes should have dotted the night. There were none. Only debris, and one spinning engine, still aflame, falling beside him like a second sun. When he hit the ground, it felt like being punched by the earth. The impact knocked air from his lungs. He rolled through wet grass and mud until everything stopped. Rain whispered across the field. The parachute collapsed over him, heavy and cold. Jack lay there, dazed, counting the seconds. No voices, no planes, no gunfire close by. Just the rain. He clawed free from the chute, heart hammering. He was supposed to land near St. Mireglise, at the center of the drop zone. But this wasn't it. The landscape was wrong, too flat, too quiet. He tore open his compass. It spun aimlessly. His radio was shattered. His map was gone. He was alone. A distant sound drifted through the mist, trucks, engines grinding, German voices. He crouched low. Through the fog he saw lights moving along a narrow road. A convoy. He counted 8 vehicles, maybe more. All heading south. He bit his lip, realizing the truth. He was 20 kilometers off target, deep in enemy territory. For a minute, despair took him. He thought of the others, of the jokes before takeoff, of the letters none of them would get to send. He looked up at the sky, now quiet, and whispered, "Guess it's just you and me, Lord." Then he moved. Slowly, carefully, he made his way across hedgerows until he reached higher ground. From there, he saw it, a small town tucked in the valley below. Stone houses, a church steeple, smoke curling from chimneys. He pulled out his pocket map, squinted at the faded print. The nearest name he could make out, St. Martin du Bois. He remembered the briefing, tiny garrison, no real value, no Allied forces nearby. Perfect place to disappear. As he approached the outskirts, dawn was breaking. The world turned gray, painted with fog. He passed a broken signpost and a dead cow, stiff in the ditch. The air smelled of wet hay and diesel. Somewhere a rooster crowed, absurdly ordinary in a land at war. He found shelter in an abandoned barn. Its roof sagged, straw scattered across the floor. A rusted tractor stood like a skeleton in the corner. He dropped his gear and sat in the dark, hands trembling. He had 36 rounds, 1 grenade, and no plan. Then, through a crack in the wall, he saw movement, 4 German soldiers in the square, laughing, smoking, rifles slung casually. They looked relaxed. Safe. Something twisted in him, not rage, not exactly, but the hard spark of defiance. If they found him, he'd die within minutes. But if they thought he wasn't alone? He studied the town layout. Narrow streets, high walls, plenty of echo. If he could make them believe an entire unit had landed, maybe he'd survive a day. Maybe longer. Jack scavenged what he could, old metal sheets, an empty fuel drum, a cracked mirror. He rigged them in the rafters to amplify sound. Then he found a broken field radio, wires chewed through, and spent half the night piecing it together. He didn't need it to transmit far, just enough static and chatter to sound alive. When darkness fell again, he climbed the barn roof. The rain had stopped. The moon hung low, silvering the fields. From up there he could see the town, windows glowing faintly, guards posted near the bridge. He took a breath and pressed the radio key, sending bursts of static across the airwaves. Unit Bravo moving, he whispered into the mic, his voice flat, American. Set perimeter at grid 74 Delta. The transmission crackled out into the night. Minutes later, a commotion. Lights flickered on. Shouts echoed through the square. German voices barked orders. Trucks revved. The garrison was waking up, nervous, alert. Jack grinned despite himself. They heard it, he murmured. Somewhere beyond the ridge, that same signal was picked up by a real German relay station. The translation, filed an hour later, read, enemy airborne elements entrenched near Saint-Martin-du-Bois. Estimated strength, 1 company, possibly more. By midnight, the town was locked down. Searchlights swept the hills. Dogs barked in the distance. Jack lay in the hay, his rifle across his chest, the faint hum of his radio still alive beside him. He was shaking, not from fear, but from the wild thrill of survival. He whispered into the dark. If this is the wrong drop zone, then I'll make it the right one. He didn't yet know that his lie, his single act of desperation, would soon spiral into one of the strangest deceptions of the war, where a lone paratrooper made an entire German regiment believe they were surrounded. And by the time anyone found out the truth, Saint-Martin-du-Bois would already belong to a ghost. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments below and don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Morning crawled over Saint-Martin-du-Bois like smoke. The fog was heavy, clinging to the stones and muffling every sound. Jack Miller woke to the smell of wet hay and rust. He'd slept in a barn, rifle across his chest, the radio still whispering static beside him. Outside, the world looked emptied out. A baker's sign hung crooked. A bicycle lay in the mud. Somewhere in the square, German voices drifted through the mist, tired, careless, unaware they were being watched. Jack crawled to the doorway, eyes narrowing. 4 soldiers lounged near a truck, drinking from tin mugs. One kicked at the cobbles, laughing. They looked too sure of their safety. That, he decided, was something he could use. Behind the barn, he'd seen what war had left behind, broken crates, a damaged mortar, 2 shells half buried in dirt. He dragged them out and set the tube on a stone wall. His hands shook as he loaded the first round, but not from fear. From focus. He pulled the trigger. The shell landed short, bursting in a fountain of mud. The second followed, dead center in the square. Windows shattered. The truck caught fire. Men shouted, running for cover. That didn't help. Jack smiled grimly. If they thought an American unit was here, maybe they'd hesitate. Maybe he'd live another day. He moved fast, climbing through backyards and alleys, keeping low. The town smelled of diesel and panic now. When he reached the church, the bell tower gave him a view of everything, the smoking truck, the soldiers yelling into radios, the villagers hiding in doorways. He switched on his broken radio, rewired to barely function. It didn't need range, it only needed to sound real. He pressed the key and murmured, Unit Bravo, position secure. Static filled the air. Then, switching to a German channel, he spoke in clipped imitation, Feindpanzer gesichtet. North Sector. Request reinforcements. Below, a motorbike engine roared to life. Orders were moving. His trick was working. An old woman appeared in the square soon after, leading 2 boys who stared up at the tower. They disappeared into the church, then reappeared at the ladder with a bundle of bread. Mon Dieu, un Américain, she whispered. Just one, Jack said, taking the bread. But let's make them think there's 100. That night, the ghost army took shape. He lined the rooftops with helmets, some real, some just pots with straps. He lit small fires behind walls to mimic camp stoves. He even hung sheets in windows to flicker like movement. Each sound became a weapon. He dropped stones into gutters to echo boots. He struck the church bell once, hard, when a German patrol came too close. The clang rolled through the fog like thunder. The soldiers fled into the dark. By midnight, St. Martin was alive with illusions. From the belfry, it looked like an occupied town, shadows pacing, lights shifting, whispers in the air. The old woman crossed herself each time a German flare went up, afraid of what she was helping create. At dawn, a French boy climbed up again, breathless. "They're leaving," he said. "The Germans, they think you have many men." Jack looked out and saw it himself, trucks rumbling east, leaving the town behind. He exhaled slowly, his body trembling with disbelief. He'd bluffed an army out of its own post. The boy grinned, holding up a tiny wooden figure he'd carved overnight, a soldier with a parachute. "Le soldat fantôme," he said proudly. "The ghost soldier." Jack smiled back, but didn't answer. He was already staring toward the horizon, where dust was rising, too low, too heavy to be missed. Engines. He wiped his hands on his jacket, picked up his rifle, and whispered, "Round 2. Because the Germans were coming back. And this time, they were bringing tanks." Engines were still only a rumor on the horizon when Jack slid back into the church tower and made himself small among the pigeons. The town below felt strung on wire, windows dark, doors barred, the square smudged with smoke from the truck he'd lit. He set his field glasses on the sill and let his breath slow. If fear was a fire, he needed to use its heat, not burn in it. He worked the night like a stagehand. First, the rooftops, a line of helmets along the town wall, each shadowed by a sandbag so the moon would red, skull, shoulders, rifle. 2 were real M1s, 3 were enameled cookware with straps. From the street they were silhouettes, from the sky, a platoon. He crossed to the schoolhouse and strung a length of wire through a pulley to a stack of saw blades under the eaves. When he pulled, the metal hummed in different notes, layer them and you heard idling engines where there were none. He added a tin sheet for a base line, then draped a blanket to muffle the shine. The bell rope became his mixing board. Down in the square he set 3 cook fires behind a low wall, spaced the way squads would do it, wide enough to avoid a single mortar, close enough to talk. He arranged mirrors at corner angles so a single moving lantern became many. Straw-stuffed coats took watch behind chimneys, 2 rifles pointed at nothing and made nothing look dangerous. He learned where his boots made the building speak and where silence lived. Every sound had to argue for an army. Near midnight he tested the radio again. The set was a corpse with a whisper, but a whisper can start rumors. He keyed short bursts on an American net, Bravo online. Outer picket set. Pause. Check fire north. Pause longer, the way tired men do when they lean on walls. Then he slid to the German frequency he'd practiced, clipped his vowels, and gave a gift, Feindkraft verlegt, Panzergeräusch Nordlich St. Martin, Koordinaten folgen. Enemy forces relocating, tank noise north. He left the coordinates just wrong enough to send anyone listening into the hedgerows he chose. Authenticity likes mistakes. A patrol wandered into his music. He let the bell toll once, a hard, single clang that rolled through stone like anger, and tossed a pebble down a gutter. Boots scrambled. One man fired at a helmet shadow and congratulated himself for surviving. Jack wrote it down in his head, "They want to believe me. Make it easy." Sometime after 1, he felt a presence at the hatch and swung his rifle, stopped. The old woman, back bent, lantern cupped in both hands. Behind her, 2 boys with a basket. Bread, a wedge of cheese, an onion, a flask that smelled like courage. "Mon Dieu," she whispered. "Vous êtes seul? Are you alone?" He nodded. "For now." The older boy, wide-eyed, whispered in careful English, "Ghost soldier." Jack almost laughed. "Tell no one I'm a ghost," he murmured. Tell them I brought friends. The younger boy saluted, badly. The old woman crossed herself, twice for luck and once for sense, and slipped away. Their footsteps folded back into the tower's bones. The engines on the horizon grew teeth. Jack glassed the far road, nothing but fog curdled with dust. He lifted the mic and fed the air just enough to keep the lie breathing. Movement on the right, hold your fire. He made his voice another soldier's, a rasp, then a drawl, then a clipped copy, easy to mishear as 3 men. He added empty clicks, the punctuation of a crowded net. Below, in the square, the German radio man tilted his head, listening to a play he hadn't bought tickets for. Near too, a flare arced up east of town, turned the mist to milk, and fell. The light washed over his false fires and made them honest. He heard a motorcycle snarl, then fade. Messages were moving. He kept his hands from shaking by counting breaths in fives. Around 3, the first proof arrived not by road but by air, a reconnaissance plane buzzing low, a slit of camera where a belly gun should have been. He stayed still while it circled. In the lens, helmets lined a wall, smoke rose from hidden fires, and a row of figures kept watch along 3 roofs. The pilot banked, satisfied. Later, that photograph would ride a wire north to a staff captain's desk, where a pencil would dig an anxious trench through paper, enemy company, possibly battalion, entrenched in St. Martin-du-Bois. Orders would bend around a ghost. Jack went on feeding small certainties to a larger fear. He timed a mortar pop, one last salvaged round, to coincide with a German patrol nosing a lane, then dragged a chain behind a cart to print tracks that led where he wanted the enemy to look. He broke a window at the school so the wind could make a soft, human sound there. When he grew tired, he talked to the pigeons. If I die, he told them, at least I'll die noisy. Near dawn, the boys returned, cheeks raw from cold. Ils partent, the older one whispered, they are leaving. Jack risked the glass, the square thinned. A truck coughed, thought better of it, and rolled away. A lieutenant stood in the open, smoking in a way that looked like praying, then stamped out his cigarette and followed. The town took a breath it hadn't owned in years. Relief came and went like weather. Dust climbed the far ridge again, not soft this time, not mist. Jack watched the smear resolve into a low, patient weight he felt in his ribs before he heard it. Tracks. The sound came up through stone into the soles of his feet and made the bell rope tremble. He keyed the mic and sent panic in an orderly voice, armor east. Range unknown. All positions cold. He had no positions. He had cold. The first tank showed as an argument with the lane, a dark prow shouldering hedgerow aside. The turret wore mourning like a helmet, due silver on steel. It halted at the town edge, listened with its engine, and turned its gun fractionally, sniffing. Jack lifted the glasses and counted details to keep from counting heartbeats, spare track links like teeth on the glassy, a chalked number flaking from the hull, a smear of mud hand-wiped from optics by a man who wanted to see. He looked down at his stage, helmets, coats, mirrors, fires, singing metal, an army made of textiles and breath, and understood the gamble with a clarity that felt like cold water. If the tank commander dismounted and walked 10 yards, the world would go from myth to math. If he stayed in his steel certainty, the lie might hold 1 more hour. Below, a German runner sprinted across the square, waving his cap. More engines answered. A second tank ground into view, then a third, each pausing to listen to the picture. Jack set his finger on the bell rope and didn't pull. The wrong note would be confession. His radio gave a final stubborn cough and died into a thin hiss, the battery a coin spent to its last shine. He breathed in, tasted cordite ghosts and old incense, and sighted down the street to where the first tank's gun, with unhurried curiosity, began to raise its snout toward the tower slit where a single American eye watched a whole German morning. He was one man. They saw a battalion. The barrel kept climbing. Morning came pretending to be peace. The air was soft, the kind that hides danger behind its calm. Birds cut the silence into pieces. For the first time in 2 days, Jack Miller thought it might be over. He stood in the church tower, looking at the fog that covered St. Martin du Bois. Smoke had finally settled. No gunfire, no shouting, only whine through broken glass. He almost believed it. Until the sound reached him. Engines. Not distant, not faint, real. A low growl crawling through the valley. Jack froze, glassed the eastern road. Trucks. Half-track. A small column, 20, maybe 30 soldiers. They weren't coming to fight an army. They were coming to find a mistake. To find him. I scared them, he thought. And that's why they're back. Below, the town stirred with dread. A grocer dropped his cart. An old man pulled a child into a doorway. Faces appeared behind shutters and vanished again. Even the church bell refused to move. One woman pointed toward the tower, whispering, "L'Américain." Another crossed herself. Fear was faster than faith. Jack could run. There was still a way north through the orchard, past the hedgerows. But when he looked at the church, at the same doors where villagers had hidden him, at the children in the cellar, something inside him refused to move. "This town is my drop zone now," he muttered. He slung his rifle and began to work. He stripped away yesterday's lies, the helmets, the scarecrow coats, the decoys. Deception had saved the town once, but it would kill them now. The Germans weren't hunting an army anymore, they were hunting ghosts. And ghosts didn't leave survivors. Jack mapped every street in his head. The alley behind the bakery offered a clean line to the square. The bell tower gave height, the cafe door a crossfire angle. He set a loose board on the main step, a trap for boots. Wedged a bottle near the gutter to chime when mortars hit. Each sound would be a warning, every echo a signal. The priest met him at the church steps, cassock soaked from dew. "Go," he whispered. "They will burn this place for you." Jack shook his head. "Then we make it harder to burn." The priest's jaw trembled, but he nodded. A moment later, the bell tolled once, not for prayer, but for warning. Families vanished underground. Doors bolted. The old rhythm of fear returned to the town, quiet and efficient. The German column entered before noon, boots clapping on cobblestones. Their sergeant smoked as if bored, his hands steady, his face blank. He looked up at the tower and smiled. Jack watched him through the sight of his rifle and felt the calm of purpose slide into place. He fired once. The sergeant fell backward, cigarette still burning in his mouth. 2 more soldiers dove for cover. Jack moved before they could answer, down the stairs, through the bakery, out the back. He fired again from a different window. Another shout, another burst of panic. They thought they were under siege. That was the plan. For an hour, Jack turned St. Martin into an illusion again, only this time it wasn't tricks of sound or smoke. It was the patience of one man pretending to be many. He fired from 3 positions, left casings where he hadn't stood, and used broken mirrors to flash sunlight across rooftops. Every corner became a sniper's nest, every alley an ambush. At the church, a group of villagers tried to help. A farmer dragged a wounded neighbor toward the door. Jack covered them from the square, shouting, "Run!" He fired high to draw German fire away, but a single shot cracked, and the farmer fell before he reached the steps. Jack's stomach twisted. For the first time since he landed, he felt fear not for himself, but for what he'd done to these people. He kept fighting anyway. By late afternoon, the half-track crawled into the center square, its gun sweeping the rooftops. Jack sprinted through a side alley, clutching the last charge he'd salvaged from the crash site, a tin filled with explosives and faith. He planted it under the cafe awning, jammed the fuse into the bottle by the gutter, and whispered a prayer he didn't believe in. When the half-track rolled forward, the bottle sang. The blast folded the street in half, smoke, brick, and screaming metal. The vehicle's track blew loose, spilling soldiers like coins from a torn pocket. Jack fired twice, then disappeared into the rubble. When the dust cleared, the Germans pulled back from the square, dragging their wounded. The town was still standing, barely. Jack's hands were raw, his rifle nearly empty, his ears ringing. The priest found him near the church steps, eyes bloodshot, body trembling. "It's not over," the priest said. "I know," Jack whispered. "They'll come again." The bell tower swayed with every heartbeat. A few remaining villagers huddled inside, praying under the echo of gunfire. Jack climbed the steps, one by one, until the world narrowed to the sound of his boots. He reached the window slit just as the first grenade clinked against the stone steps outside. The explosion ripped through the quiet like thunder. Dust filled the air. Jack chambered his rifle, leaned against the wall, and whispered into the smoke. "Then let's begin the second day of my war." By afternoon the war had shrunk to a handful of streets. Smoke hung low, lazy and gray. Jack Miller crouched in the shell of the bakery, counting bullets with a thumb gone raw. He had 20 left. Outside, boots scuffed stone, the clipped rhythm of a patrol that thought it was hunting ghosts. In a way, it was. He shifted positions every few minutes, from window to stairwell, from roof to alley. A rifle shot here, a thrown bottle there, each echo placed like punctuation. He wanted them to believe there were dozens of Americans hiding among the houses. If they believed that, the town might live. He fired twice toward the butcher's lane, then crawled through a back wall the blast had opened the night before. His breath steamed in the dust. "If they think we're many," he whispered, "they'll stay cautious." From the church cellar came muffled prayers, soft, desperate, rhythmic. The priest had turned the nave into a bunker. A few villagers still risked running supplies across alleys, bread, water, torn linens. When Jack saw them darting through the open, he covered them with bursts from his rifle, tracing lines of noise across the rooftops. At dusk, he caught sight of two farmers carrying a wounded man toward the church steps. German rifles flashed from the far end of the street. Jack fired back, drawing their aim. The farmers reached safety, but one fell halfway up the stairs, hit clean through the chest. Jack froze. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. The woman who'd once called him El Americane now stared at him like he was both savior and curse. He pressed his forehead to the wall. "You started this," he told himself. "You finish it." The hours stretched thin. He moved like smoke, never still, never seen twice in the same place. He planted a charge under a broken cart, rigged with a fuse made from wire and patience. When a German squad tried to flank the square, the explosion turned the corner into chaos. Screams, then silence. Jack slipped away before the dust settled. He hadn't eaten in a day. His hands shook as he reloaded. Somewhere beyond the hills, he imagined his regiment pushing forward, unaware that one stray paratrooper was holding a whole garrison's attention. It would have been funny if it weren't so cruel. Just before midnight, his radio crackled to life, a burst of static, then two words drowned by noise, "Able, outpost." His heart jumped. He grabbed the transmitter. "This is Private Miller. I'm in St. Martin." "Repeat, Saint," the radio hissed and died. The silence that followed felt heavier than any shell. He sat there a long time, listening to his own pulse. Near 1 a.m, a flare turned the town white. Shadows became soldiers. The half-track rumbled back into the square, its gun turning slowly, like a finger pointing. Jack waited until its spotlight swept past, then tossed a bottle against a wall to draw fire. The gun spat rounds into the wrong street, the noise deafening. He used the confusion to crawl behind the cafe ruins. He had one charge left, a tin full of explosives and faith. He jammed it under the awning, tied the fuse to a length of string, and prayed the wind stayed still. When the half-track's tracks met the gutter, the string pulled taut. The blast wasn't large, but it was loud enough to convince the world something had died. The vehicle lurched, one wheel ripped free. German voices shouted, angry, uncertain. Jack was already gone. He ducked into the alley behind the school, clutching his rifle like a heartbeat. Rain began to fall, cold, steady, washing the blood into the cracks between stones. For a moment, the town looked clean again. Then another flare rose, red this time. More engines. More voices. The siege wasn't ending, it was gathering. He wiped the rain from his face and looked toward the tower. The priest's bell rope still swung gently in the wind. Jack smiled without joy. Looks like we hold till dawn. He climbed the steps 2 at a time, ribs aching with each breath. Below him, the town was a patchwork of fire and fog. He took position by the narrow window, chambered the next round, and waited for the next wave. Somewhere in the darkness, metal clattered against stone, a grenade rolling across the churchyard. It stopped with a hollow click near the steps. He closed his eyes and whispered, "All right. Round 2. And the night exploded. Dawn crept in like smoke through a broken window. The town hall, once tidy and proud, now smelled of wet dust, blood, and burnt paper. Jack Miller lay beneath the shattered sill, his breath visible in the cold. He counted what he had left, 5 rounds, a torn belt for a bandage, and a stubborn thought that maybe he could still hold this place a little longer. Outside, the square was a graveyard of shapes. A burned truck leaned against the church steps. Shutters hung by one hinge. From the fog rose the soft metallic rhythm of boots and rifles. The Germans were back, methodical now, moving with the confidence of men finishing a chore. Jack raised his rifle, found the one with binoculars, and fired. The glass burst, the man fell, and shouts answered him. He ducked before the return fire came, chips of stone stinging his face. He waited for their pause, that half-second when they reloaded, then sent a single shot down the alley, just to remind them, he was still there. Amerikaner. Hand hoch, someone yelled. Hands up. Another voice, in French this time, rendezvous. Ce sera mieux. Surrender. It will be better. Jack almost laughed. You first, he muttered, pulling the belt tighter around his bleeding ribs. Pain steadied him better than courage ever could. They tried to flank him, moving through the side streets. He caught one at the door, a shadow, then a face, and fired once. The body collapsed without drama. He pushed it aside with his boot, listening. More boots, closer. A grenade rolled across the floor. He kicked it back through the doorway, hit the ground, and the explosion tore the air apart. For a moment he couldn't hear anything but the ringing inside his skull. He crawled behind a desk, gasping. On the wall above him, an old calendar fluttered, municipal holidays from another life. Bastille Day. Harvest Festival. None of that mattered now. He wiped the blood from his cheek and tried to breathe slow. They came again, careful this time. He heard them whisper, moving like smoke. He caught one in his sights, fired, missed, fired again. The third shot found its mark. Then his rifle clicked, empty. He stared at it, furious and calm all at once. He fished one last bullet from his pocket, felt its small, perfect weight, and loaded it like a prayer. Outside, the Germans called again, softer now, almost kindly. It's enough. You can stop. He thought of his friends, the ones who'd never made it out of the plane. Of the villagers hiding in cellars, listening for his gun. Of how silence could sometimes sound like surrender. Not yet, he said under his breath. Then he heard it, low at first, like thunder rolling behind a hill. Engines. Many of them. The sound grew, swelling across the rooftops. Not the cough of German trucks. This was heavier, deeper, a vibration you could feel in your ribs. The Germans noticed too. Shouts. A scramble for cover. Jack crawled to the window and looked up. Over the far ridge came the first shadow, broad wings, round nose, the shape he'd seen painted on briefing maps and pin-up posters. AP-47 Thunderbolt. For a second, he didn't move. Then he smiled, a cracked, tired grin that didn't quite fit his face. "Took you long enough," he whispered. He let the rifle slip from his hand and leaned back against the wall. The air outside was trembling now, the sky pulsing with power. He exhaled once, long, slow, and let himself fall to the floor. Then the sky began to roar. Morning came not with light, but with the smell of smoke and silence. Saint-Martin-du-Bois was a skeleton of a town, its streets grey with ash, its air heavy with the breath of things that had burned too long. Jack Miller lay in the dust, half buried beneath the doorway of the town hall. The world swam in and out, a slideshow of broken sky and drifting soot. For a moment, he thought he was deaf. Then, slowly, sound crept back, the groan of timber, the hiss of cooling metal, and beneath it, something deeper. Engines. At first it was faint, like thunder with a heartbeat. Then it grew. Louder. Rounder. Familiar. Jack turned his head toward the horizon, and his cracked lips moved though no words came out. Through the fog he saw them, silver wings cutting through the pale morning, sunlight flashing off propellers. P-47 Thunderbolts. For a long second, he didn't believe it. "You're real," he whispered, though the words were lost in the rising roar. The first two planes banked low, lining up on the road north of the town. The sound hit like a physical thing, rattling windows that no longer had glass. Germans in the open scrambled for cover, shouting over one another, their discipline breaking under the sky's new voice. The thunderbolts dropped in with surgical cruelty. Their guns lit up, pouring red tracers into the column of trucks and fuel carriers snaking toward the town. The air itself seemed to fracture. An oil truck exploded, rolling fire down the hill. The smell of gasoline, cordite, and earth mixed into something that felt like victory. Jack pushed himself up to his knees and stared, too tired to cheer, too stunned to weep. For the first time in 2 days, he thought, I saw the American flag. On a wing. The plane swept across the ridge again, tearing into what was left of the German convoy. The town trembled under the weight of salvation. Windows shattered inward from the pressure, bells clanged somewhere unseen. When the last of the formation pulled up, the Germans were running, half toward the woods, half nowhere at all. Jack slumped against the wall, smiling through the dust. He could feel the blood drying on his side, the ache in his arms, the raw tremor that came from surviving too much. But now, at least, he wasn't alone. Minutes passed, or maybe hours, before he heard another sound. Not engines this time, but boots. Many boots. Fast, purposeful, with the rhythm of men who knew how to move under fire. He blinked through the haze and saw them, figures in mottled jump smocks, rifles low, eyes scanning windows. American. He tried to stand, failed once, then managed. When they reached the square, he waved, though it probably looked more like he was falling. A sergeant spotted him, hand up. Hold your fire, he barked. The patrol froze. One man shouted, medic. They surrounded him carefully, the way you'd approach a ghost that might still shoot back. The sergeant crouched in front of him, young, dirty, disbelief in his eyes. You friendly? Jack laughed, or tried to. Private Jack Miller. 82nd Airborne, he croaked. The sergeant frowned. From where? Jack gestured weakly toward the wrecked town around them. Here, he said. All of it. The medic slid in beside him, unwrapping a bandage that smelled of alcohol and cloth. You're lucky, pal. Bullet missed the good stuff, he said, tying the band tight around Jack's ribs. Been holding this town alone? Jack smiled faintly. Guess so. With a little help from imagination. The sergeant stood, turning in a slow circle to take in the devastation, burned trucks, fake artillery, shell holes that led nowhere. He whistled softly. We thought there was a whole platoon dug in here. Maybe two. Jack leaned back against the wall, eyes closing for a moment. Nope, he said quietly. Just one stubborn idiot. Across the square, two French boys climbed out from behind a stone fence, dragging a makeshift flag, blue from a shirt, white from a curtain, red from someone's skirt. They tied it to a broom handle and planted it in the church steps. It fluttered weakly in the exhaust wind of the departing thunderbolts. The sergeant watched, jaw tight. "Well," he said, "looks like you made believers out of them." Jack opened his eyes and followed the flag's motion. "Good," he whispered. "They deserve to." The medic checked his pulse again and scribbled something on a tag. "You're gonna live, soldier," he said. "What the hell were you thinking, holding off a column by yourself?" Jack let out a dry chuckle. "Wasn't thinking. Just, didn't want to move." A lieutenant arrived, map in hand, dust on his boots. "Who's in command here?" he asked sharply. The sergeant gestured toward Jack. The officer crouched beside him, scanning the town with the look of someone comparing rumor to reality. "We had reports of heavy American resistance here," he said. "German radio mentioned artillery fire, multiple units. How many men did you have?" Jack blinked up at him. His voice was barely more than a rasp. "One." The lieutenant stared, then exhaled through his nose, half disbelief, half awe. He looked down at the map again, then at the bullet-pocked walls, the burned vehicles, the flag on the church. "We thought a whole company was here," he murmured. Jack smiled through split lips. "You weren't wrong." The medic tightened his grip under Jack's arm as the thunderbolts circled once more overhead, their engines fading eastward. The square filled with sunlight and drifting dust. Somewhere, a church bell rang itself back into life. The lieutenant folded his map, still shaking his head. "You've got more ghosts here than soldiers," he said quietly. Jack looked out over the ruins, the streets he'd defended, the smoke rising like memory. "Yeah," he said. "But they did their job." The lieutenant frowned, puzzled. "Who did?" Jack's eyes fluttered closed. "All of them." The sky thundered once more in the distance, fading to silence. And in that silence, for the first time in 2 days, St. Martin-du-Bois was free. The tent flapped like an exhausted lung in the morning wind. Inside, the air was thick with cigarette smoke, cold coffee, and the clatter of typewriter keys. Piles of reports, half-dried mud on boots, voices speaking in clipped phrases, the daily machinery of a war that still didn't know it was already history. Private First Class Jack Miller sat at a folding table in the middle of it, blanket over his shoulders, ribs bound tight with bandages. His uniform was torn, streaked with soot and dried blood. The metal of his dog tags was cold against his neck. He hadn't slept in almost 3 days. Across from him sat a captain with thin hair and a sharper pencil. "Name, rank, serial number," he said, eyes fixed on the paper. Jack repeated the words like a prayer. "Private First Class Jack Miller. 82nd Airborne." The captain scribbled, then looked up. "You're the one from St. Martin-du-Bois?" Jack nodded. The tent creaked. Somewhere outside, a jeep coughed, a hammer struck metal. The captain clicked his pen. "Start from the beginning." Jack told it all, the burning C-47, the jump too early, the parachute that opened into fire. The crash in the wrong field, the small French town swallowed by fog and fear. He told them about the mortar he'd found, the mirrors and ropes, the fake gunfire, the boys who hung a flag. His voice was quiet, steady, without pride. Every so often, his hand shook when he reached for his canteen. The typist at the back of the tent stopped pretending to work. The lieutenant beside the captain leaned forward, arms crossed. "You did all that, alone?" Jack's eyes flicked up. "With a little help from imagination." That earned a small laugh from someone behind him, quickly smothered. The captain leaned back. "You're telling us you held an entire town against German armor for 48 hours? Jack shrugged. "Not really held it. Just convinced them somebody else already had." Silence settled in the tent. Even the typewriter paused. Then the flap opened, and a major entered, tall, gray around the temples, smelling of wind and cordite. "Is this Miller?" he asked. The captain nodded. "Sir, his stories, unusual." The major pulled up a chair, flipping open a folder thick with reports. "Let's hear it." Jack repeated the basics, slower this time. He didn't embellish. When he spoke about the people who'd helped, the old woman with the cellar, the farmer who didn't survive, his voice faltered. The major didn't interrupt. When he finished, the captain cleared his throat. "With respect, sir, this sounds improbable." The major smiled faintly. "So does this." He slid a paper across the table. German intercepts from the same dates. Strong American resistance, estimated company strength. Heavy artillery fire. Their words, not ours. The tent seemed to shrink. The lieutenant took the paper, read it, then read it again. They really believed there was a full unit there. Jack said nothing. He just stared at the floor, tracing the dirt with his boot. The major closed the folder slowly. "Well, Private, it looks like your performance had quite an audience." Jack exhaled, half laugh, half disbelief. "Guess I should have sold tickets." The officer beside the major muttered, "You cost them at least a day." "Maybe saved the bridgehead at Corentin." The major nodded, thoughtful. "Maybe more than that." Then, softer, "What were you thinking, holding them off alone?" Jack looked at his hands. "I wasn't thinking. I just didn't want to run." No one spoke for a long time. The only sound was the tent fabric fluttering, like someone breathing just outside. A corporal entered, breathless, papers in hand. "Sir, Field Recon brought this." He spread a worn German map on the table. In the center, St. Martin du Bois was boxed in red pencil. Next to it, a note in tight handwriting, "Starker Amerikanischer Widerstand, Strong American Resistance." The captain leaned forward. "Well," he murmured, "that settles it." The major nodded slowly. "Seems your ghosts fooled the best of them." Jack stared at the map for a long time. The little town looked like a smudge of dirt on the paper, nothing more. "They weren't ghosts," he said finally. "They were just people trying not to die." The major looked at him, and for the first time, there was something like respect in his expression. "You'll get written up," he said. "That's as far as it goes. No medals for stories we can't explain." Jack smiled faintly. "Didn't ask for one." The captain stamped the paperwork, a dull, heavy sound that felt like finality. "You're being transferred to Corentin for medical evaluation," he said. "After that, possible rotation home." He tore the paper from the pad, handed it across the table. Jack folded it carefully, like something fragile. "That's it?" "That's it," the captain said. "War's still got places to be." Jack stood. His legs shook, but he managed to salute. The major returned it with quiet precision. "You did well, Miller," he said. "Better than anyone had the right to expect." Outside, the sun hit the canvas walls, turning them gold for a moment. Trucks rumbled, planes droned somewhere high above. Life, or whatever came after war, kept moving. Jack stepped into the light, the blanket slipping from his shoulders. In the distance, he could still smell smoke from the ruins of St. Martin. He wondered if the flag was still there, the one the boys had made from scraps. He didn't get a medal. He didn't get a speech. He got silence. And a ticket home. Summer light lay thin over the porch boards, turning every splinter into a line of memory. The house was small, the kind a man buys when he wants most of his life to fit inside a single room. Jack Miller sat in a chair that had learned his bones, the wood polished by the slow insistence of years. Beside him, a cardboard box with a torn lid, a pair of worn jump boots stacked heel to toe, and a photograph gone the color of tea. In it, a church with chipped steps, a broom handle flag, smoke like pencil smudges above a square. On the back, in a younger hand, St. Martin du Bois. It was the early 1960s. Neighbors mowed lawns into obedient stripes. Television laughed through open windows. The war had become a movie other people changed the channel on. Jack worked at the post office, counted stamps and miles, kept his shoulders even. Some afternoons he walked to the river and skipped stones until the water showed him a sky without engines. He said little about France. When asked, he said, "I jumped and landed somewhere I wasn't supposed to, and let that be the truth it was." A history student came one spring, notebook squared, tie too tight for the weather. "Sir, I'm collecting oral histories," he said at the door, standing as if the threshold itself were a superior officer. "The small stories. Things that don't make the books." Jack led him out to the porch. The boy's pen hovered. "Did you ever fire a bazooka?" he began, eager to get the movie right. Jack smiled with half his face. "No. I fired a town." The boy blinked, not sure if it was a joke. Jack pointed to the box. "Boots are yours to look at," he said. "The rest is just breath." Later, a tape machine arrived in the mail from a veterans project, gray, whirring, with a red light that made men's throats forget how to speak. Jack held the microphone like a bird he meant to set free. He told them about the airplane and the rain, the belfry and the bottle that sang, the farmers and the flag. He didn't raise his voice. When the tape clicked off, the room kept the quiet like a promise. He wrote letters sometimes, the way men do who want to hold a line that has already moved. One was to a buddy from Basic, a man who shipped to Italy and never wrote back after 44. The letter was returned marked undeliverable, deceased, and Jack kept it anyway, folded twice in a drawer. A carbon copy of another letter found its way to an archivist years later. The archivist's voice would one day read it into a recorder, slow and careful, the way you read something that grew heavy with carrying. "I didn't want a medal, Bill. I wanted the Germans to take the long road so our boys wouldn't have to take the short one. I did not hold anything. I distracted it. That's all. If there's a reason I'm still breathing, it's maybe because I didn't try to be brave. I just refused to leave." He married late, gently. His wife learned the shapes of his silence and did not attempt to sand them down. On summer nights they ate peaches on the steps and listened to crickets stitch the dark. When thunderstorms rolled in, Jack would stand at the screen door until the first heavy drop struck the porch roof, measuring, perhaps, how close the thunder sounded to radial engines. Sometimes, when the rain passed, he would touch the photograph with 2 fingers, the way a man salutes without needing witnesses. In the town where no one knew the name St. Martin Dubois, he was Mr. Miller from the post office, the one who remembered birthdays on parcels and who once stopped traffic so a stray dog could decide which way to live. His hands shook a little when he sorted mail, no one said why. The church bell in their neighborhood sounded different from the one in France, but on certain mornings, if the air was thin, it could fool him for half a second, and then he would smile at his own heart for telling old stories to new days. Life became maintenance, of fences, of friendship, of the modest distances between strangers. He went to reunions and didn't wear the jacket. He walked cemeteries and never checked for his name. When asked by a schoolteacher to speak to a classroom, he brought a map and a pair of tin snips. Sometimes, he said, cutting a square around a small French town, history happens because someone made the page smaller for a while. In 1984, a letter in a foreign hand arrived tucked among the bills. The return address wore an accent in its ink, Mairie de Saint Martin Dubois. Inside was a photograph of a display case in a village office, old boots, a child's 3-color flag, and a German map under glass. A small card explained in French that the map had been found in departmental archives, misfiled under road repairs. Next to the town, in firm pencil from 40 years earlier, starker Amerikanischer Widerstand, strong American resistance. There was also a note, translated in careful English, "Dear Mr. Miller, if we had known a name to write sooner, we would have written it. Our parents spoke of a week when we were in the war and not in it. They said the sky came back. Please accept this as proof that even the enemy believed you were many. It was signed by a mayor who had been a child in 1944, and by two old men whose faces Jack could place if he closed his eyes and moved a mirror through memory. He put the letter on the kitchen table and sat with it until the light went out of the room. He didn't need vindication, the town did. It had it now, in pencil and map paper. He put on his jacket, even though the night was warm, and stepped onto the porch. The board spoke his name back to him in the way wood does when it has learned a man's weight. Somewhere a neighbor's radio played a station that still believed good news would keep. He went inside, took the cardboard box from the shelf, and pulled the photograph free. He slid the new picture, the map in its glass, behind the old one so that paper touched paper, town touched town. On the back of the original, beneath his young handwriting, he added with a dull pencil, "They found us." When people later asked what he did in the war, the answer stayed small. "Delivered," he'd say, with a postman's shrug. If pressed, he might add, "a town, once." The listener would laugh, thinking it a joke, and Jack would let the laugh be enough. He did not win the war. He did not change the course of empires or redraw a single border. But for 2 days in June, he stopped the war from entering one small square of France. He made a place for children to sleep and for a flag to try its colors in the wind. Years after he was gone, an archivist filed his tape beside the letter and the map, and a school in St. Martin hung a photograph of a broomhandle mast. Every June, someone rang the church bell and left the rope swaying, as if a hand still rested there. On Jack's porch, the summer dark thickened. The box settled. A breath moved the curtain. Then the quiet broke with a single dry sound, as if memory had dropped something it no longer needed to carry. The small, precise ring of a brass casing touching stone.